it's Brittany and welcome back. So this week's installment of Makeup and Murder, or I'm gonna shift it to, Unwind with True Crime, is gonna be different moving forward. So recently I have kind of done a lot of soul searching and reviewing of my own content, and I want to be able to bring you guys the best true crime stories in the best way. And I just felt like, at least for now, until I become more efficient with makeup and things like that, I want to try to focus on the story instead of trying to create a look at the same time. I'm so passionate about true crime. So what I'm going to do is I will be unwinding with true crime. So makeup is already done, and we're just going to have a nice glass of wine that kind of fits the story, and we'll unwind with some true crime. So if you want to hear this week's story, then stay tuned. Now, before we go any further, I wanted to thank everyone who's come along with me on this journey so far. It means so much to me to have reached, over 350 subscribers in a couple of months. So I'm really happy about that. But if you have not subscribed or you're just finding my channel, make sure you also subscribe. It really helps me to continue to grow, and it means a lot to me. Also, make sure you hit that notification bell so that you get notified when I post new content, whether it be Unwind with True Crime. I also do unboxings of subscription boxes and things that I purchased, all types of hauls, reviews for hair and makeup, anything under the beauty and lifestyle sun. Sis, I do it, okay? So make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. So this week's story is all about the Grim Sleeper. Now, this story is unique because this is one of the very few African-American serial killers. So you'll see in this case, as with any of the other cases that we cover that deal within the realm of an African-American community, you don't get as much coverage because the victims are African-American, or a lot of them are drug users or sex workers, and this is no different. This case is absolutely the same. So before we jump into this story, I want to share with y'all what glass of wine I'm drinking today. I thought it would be fitting, since we're talking about our very first African-American serial killer on my channel, to go ahead and have a nice glass of chocolate wine. And this is the Vin Chocolat Almond, and this is from Cooper's Hawk. I am a member, for those of you who are familiar with Cooper's Hawk, and they've always had a chocolate wine, but they just released this one, which has an almond flavor element added to it as well. So we're gonna have a little bit of chocolate wine for our chocolate serial killer. Y'all, it smells just like a Tootsie Roll. I kid you not, it smells like a Tootsie Roll. I love this wine. All right, let's get into the story. So, the Grim Sleeper. So, the Grim Sleeper, whose real name was Lonnie Franklin, was born August 30th, 1952, and he was born and raised in South Central LA. Now, Lonnie was married twice. His first wife is the person who's believed to have created the monster that we hear and see about today, where she was a drug abuser. Specifically, she was a crackhead, and he loved her. That was the love of his life, but she basically ruined his life. She used drugs. She used their money to purchase drugs. She wouldn't pay any of the bills, any other rent, and basically just made his life a living hell. So he developed this hatred for women who were drug abusers, and that kind of trickled down to sex workers, because the majority of sex workers were drug abusers. So any woman that was out there, using drugs and, doing whatever, instead of taking care of what he saw, taking care of themselves and taking care of home, he developed a strong hatred for these women. Now, with his second marriage, he married a, very well-respected woman within the community. She was a church-goer, very involved in the community, a very sweet woman. Everybody thought she was extremely sweet, but their relationship was quite a bit strange because although they had 2 children, they were never really seen out together. People assumed that when they were home, they were together, but nobody even thought that they lived or slept in the same bedrooms. They basically would if they were ever spotted out, they were spotted completely separately. They were never even seen in a car together. So they just basically, it felt like they led separate lives completely. And then on top of that, their garage was off limits to his wife. She never went into the garage. That was kind of his man space, his man cave, if you will, where, you know, later we'll find it was quite more than just a man cave. Now, as I stated before, he did have 2 children, one specifically named Christopher. And Christopher will play a significant role in this case later on down the line, but I did just want to call that out, that he did have children, and he never drank and he never used drugs himself. So it really, really just drove his anger when he saw others. And it wasn't just women, it was any drug user really that he just has a certain disdain for. Now, during, you know, his working years, he worked for a number of years as like a garbage truck operator. He was kind of the guy back in the day. They used to have 2 people, one person, you know, hopped off and dumped out the garbage. He was that guy. So he did that for a number of years. And interestingly enough, he also worked as a mechanic for the police station for a little while as well. Irony, y'all. But generally, he was well known in his neighborhood in South Central. He was probably the wealthiest man on the block. He was the guy, and we had a guy when I lived on the south side of Chicago. We had a guy right across the street from our house. His name was Nick. Shout out to Nick if you're still around. He was the neighborhood mechanic. He would work on cars in front of his house. Whatever you needed, he would get for you. You needed a part, he would get it for you. Whatever you needed. And Lonnie was the same way. He was the neighborhood mechanic. Whatever you needed, whether it was for cars or not for cars, he could get it for you. A TV, VCR, a radio, a whole new car, whatever you needed, he could get it for you. So he, you know, had been arrested a couple of times for receiving stolen property. He kind of ran a side business of, you know, dealing in stolen vehicles. He did some insurance fraud. But, you know, growing up in a community like that, it was however you got your money. As long as you weren't hurting nobody, it's however you got your coins. So, you know, he was really well respected in the neighborhood. He was very helpful. People in the neighborhood couldn't afford to go to an AutoZone or something like that to pick up the proper parts that they needed for their car, or walk into a Best Buy and buy a brand new TV. So, you know, he was the plug. So everybody respected him. Everybody loved him. And people wanted to work for him. He had the coins. People wanted to work for him. Now, some of the younger people in the neighborhood just, you know, they saw him as like the horny old man. He had his ways. Y'all know that type of old man, especially when you were young and you were like hanging out with your friends and you saw this old creep coming around. He was that type of guy to the younger people. His son's girlfriend, his son Chris, his girlfriend remembered that he would do, you know, he was just creepy. He would always find a way to say something that was sexualized in any type of conversation. He would keep, you know, dirty magazines in the bathroom in the open, so it wasn't hidden in the bathroom. She distinctly remembered him standing at his son's door while she and him were in there, you know, doing their thing. They're young kids. They want to have fun. And she specifically recalls he would stand at the door and listen and almost peek, you know what I'm saying? So he was that guy. He was the creeper to the younger kids. But to everybody else in the community, he was well respected. And at the same time, I don't know how he had a wife in the house that was so God-fearing and well respected herself, but let all this stuff happen. I don't even know how they ended up together, okay? But let's get into, you know, his crimes and the build up to what took place in South Central LA. So in 1975, he was in the U.S. Army and he was stationed over in Germany. So January 24th, he was actually dishonorably discharged from the U.S. Army when he was, you know, arrested and convicted for gang raping a German teenage girl. And basically what happened is him and a couple of other, you know, soldiers They stopped a teenage girl on the street in Germany and they asked her for directions somewhere. When she stopped to, be helpful to them, she, all of a sudden is being held at knife point and being kidnapped and thrown into the vehicle. Once she was kidnapped and thrown into the vehicle, she was repeatedly raped, and then they also took photos of her. Now, she was smart enough to pretend that she was interested in Lonnie, and she actually said, can I have your number? I like to call you sometime, that kind of thing, playing it cool. And so dumb Lonnie gives her his phone number, and she also took down the license plate of the vehicle that they were in. So they let her go, and she went straight to the police like she should have. So that's how he was identified. That is how he was caught. And he was dishonorably just discharged for it. Now, also, I mentioned that Lonnie was a neighborhood mechanic and he dealt in stolen cars, that kind of thing. He would also buy cars and then have someone that he had on his payroll burn them for, insurance payouts. So he would do that quite often as well. And there was one particular time where he had one of his employees burn one of the cars for insurance, and the employee recalled, he went through the car trying to see if he could find something valuable within the car, and he remembered seeing bloody women's clothing and blood all in the back of the car. Now, again, these are people who are barely living, barely making a living, and of course, he doesn't want to stir the pot. He's looking for something valuable. If there's nothing there, he's not going to ruin his lick by, saying, hey, police, I found this, this, and this in this car. And then he has no more income. So he completely ignored it and burned the car, which we'll later, kind of figure out that was probably some potential evidence that would have been useful to the police. But this is a community where police are not helpful. They are not trusted, and we'll find there is valid reason why as we go on with this story. It's good. The crimes kind of start around 1985 in South Central LA, and this is during the crack epidemic. So everybody and their mama is addicted to crack or selling crack or both. So there were so many people dying. So many people doing illegal things just to get the next hit. So for police, going into a neighborhood like South Central LA was pointless. For what? Who are we saving? These people don't contribute to our community. Who are we saving? Lonnie had a habit, although he was not fond of prostitutes and drug users, he liked to hire them. And there are a number of prostitutes and drug users that he did not attack or murder. So I know that he was fond of them to get what he wanted from them, but at the same time, he felt that he was doing, a service by the things that he did to some of these women. So we find out he liked to, hire women, and whether it be paying them in drugs, paying them in money, he liked to hire these women and take pictures of them. So he had a kind of camper van where there was nothing in the back of the van. There was the 2 seats in the front and then nothing in the back of the van. So he would take his van, he would park it in his driveway. So his garage was detached from his home. So he had a long driveway that led to the back of his house where his garage was situated. He would park that van back there right in front of that garage, and he had a camera, he had a tripod to hold the camera, and he had a mattress in the back of that van. So he would take pictures of these women. He would, do whatever he needed to do with these women, but this is also where he would murder these women. And he would murder these women, and then he would take them and drop their bodies off at a different location. Now, during the time that Lonnie Franklin was in business, which is, the business of murdering, there was a number of killings taking place in South Central LA. A number of women were being murdered, they were being stabbed and strangled, and then there were a number of women being shot. So there was a pretty prolific serial killer at that time. This is around 1985. And the police knew that between the periods of 1983 and 1985, the person that they call the Southside Slayer was in action. Now, because this was taking place again in South Central LA, which is an extremely low income area where, business is not booming. People are just living paycheck to paycheck, trying to get by, trying to support their families. Yes, there was a lot of drug activity, a lot of prostitution in the area. So police didn't care to warn the community. It wasn't important enough to them to warn the community. They had a task force that was called the Southside Slayer Task Force, and that was to investigate these murders. It was about 13 women that was stabbed and killed and after being strangled that they formed this task force for. But this was pretty much a secretive task force where they were investigating, but just didn't let the community know, y'all need to protect yourselves. Stay off these streets. Why? It was what they like to call NHI, or no human involvement. And what that meant was these people that were being murdered during this time period were considered not human. They were drug addicts. They were prostitutes. So these people were not considered human enough to care or be warned. Because there were so many different MOs for all of the murders that were happening in this community of South Central LA, at first the police thought, okay, maybe there was one serial killer at play here. But some of these women are now being stabbed and strangled. Some of these women are being shot and strangled. And it's just two different MOs. And with that, they just were able to, come to the conclusion that there's multiple serial killers in this neighborhood. Multiple. And again, do you think that they warned the community? They didn't. With the evidence and, the MO, they eventually were able to find out that there were 5 other serial killers in play at the same time as Lonnie Franklin. And I will dive into those in some other videos, but 5 different serial killers that were killing at the same time in the same place as that. Now, mind you, this is also the heyday of Richard Ramirez, or the Night Stalker, which was getting all type of publicity. And you know why? Because he was killing in LA and San Fran, like that area. He was killing in the right place to get publicity. But here we are in a low-income community where there are a total of 6 serial killers killing all at the same time. And there is nothing being reported, nothing being communicated to the community. This is why these communities don't trust police. This is why they don't go to police when something happens. For what? They don't care about us. So why should we go to them with anything? That is the mentality, and that is why. Now, the first person that was murdered that actually kind of piqued the interest of a new serial killer being in play starting in 1985 was Barbara Ware. Now, Barbara Ware was murdered on January 10th, 1987, and she was only 23 years old when she was shot to death. Now, she was found to have been murdered by the same weapon, which was a .25 caliber gun. And this same gun was used in 2 previous murders. And the 2 previous murders were Henrietta Wright and Deborah Jackson. Deborah Jackson was killed on August 10th, 1985. And Henrietta Wright was killed on August 12th, 1986. These 2 women were killed with the same weapon that Barbara Ware was killed with. Now, the police identified this in 1987. So at that point, we have a serial killer. This was not communicated to the community until 2008. They didn't even tell the families that they had found a link to 2 other cases for their own family member until 2008. This is the treatment that these communities receive from law enforcement. And it was communicated very clearly by people in power within the community that, hey, it's really not that big of a deal. He's only killing prostitutes. He's only killing drug addicts. He's cleaning up the streets for us. Now, Lonnie Franklin's only surviving victim was Anitria Washington. And Anitria was attacked on November 20th, 1988, when she was going to a party and she was on her way to her friend's house. And, you know, she was trying to get cute with her friend. So she's walking down the street on her way and Lonnie stops her in a car. And she distinctly remembered because Lonnie drives an old orange Pinto. And at that time, those cars was out of style at that point. So she found it, you know, interesting that he had an orange Pinto and it was in such good shape. He stopped her and asked her where she's going. And she said, I'm just on my way to a friend's house. And he offered her a ride. So thinking nothing of it, thinking he looks like a normal guy, she got in the car, and as soon as they turned the corner, he shot her. She didn't even know she was shot. And before she could even realize that she was shot, he, you know, says to her, like, don't do anything, don't make a sound, or I will shoot you again. She wasn't even aware that she was shot in the first place. So she was shot, she was raped, and then she was dumped. But luckily, she survived. Now, she was also shot with the same gun as a number of other victims. I think it was 8 victims by this point. So between 1985 and 1988, he has killed 8 victims. Those victims, and y'all, I am going to read them off a list because I want to make sure I get these names right, because I am all about saying the names of these victims in any case that I talk about. Between 1985 and 1988, there are 8 victims that we're aware of at this point that were murdered by Lonnie Franklin. So that is Deborah Jackson, who was killed August 10th, 1985. That was Henrietta Wright, who was killed August 12th, 1986. We have Barbara Ware, January 10th, 1987. Bernita Sparks, which was April 15th, 1987. Mary Lowe, who was November 1st, 1987. Lucretia Jefferson, who was January 30th, 1988. Then Alicia Alexander, who was killed on September 11th, 1988. So this is 8 women that he has attacked and murdered before we get one person who was lucky enough to survive, being Anitria Washington. Now, from 1988 to 2002, Lonnie goes quiet, and this is why at the time the serial killer was named the Grim Sleeper, because he went basically dormant for 14 years. Honey, after that rampage, I guess he felt like he needed a break, and he picked back up in 2002. And March 19th of 2002, he murdered Princess Bartholomew. And on July 11th, 2003, he murdered Valerie McCorby. That is 10 women that were murdered. No matter what issues they have, no matter who's a drug addict, who's a prostitute, it doesn't matter. Everybody deserves to live. There is no one that is worthless. Everyone has a family. Everyone deserves life. Who are you to decide that you are God and you're going to go clean up the streets? All because you had a bad experience with a wife that you chose to marry. Now, our last known victim of Lonnie Franklin, or the Grim Sleeper, was Janisha Peters. And Janisha was murdered on New Year's Day of 2007. She was the case that really pulled all these other 11 cases together. And at this time, we are at a space where we have DNA that we can test and pull everything together. We have the advanced technology to test things like DNA. And also before now, it was not mandatory to collect DNA when you were booked or when you were imprisoned. So around 2004, 2005 is when the requirement of collecting a DNA sample for anyone who was, convicted, this is when that started to happen. So now we have our first case after that point, when we have advancements in DNA, that we can really test this DNA and test the DNA of all these other cases that have taken place going back to 1985, and they're all tied together by DNA. So we have them tied together by ballistics, and then we also have them tied together by DNA. At the same time, the police also had a recorded 911 call, and this goes back to the 80s. Again, police didn't care that much. They go back to the 80s, and it's a recording of somebody calling in saying that they just witnessed Lonnie Franklin. Like, there was no question about who it was. The man gave the van what it looked like, the license plate number. Like, there was no question of who it was. And they said that they saw him dumping a dead body. So if you had that call back from the 80s, and we're in 2007 and this man is still free, you didn't care. You didn't care. With that combined with the forensic DNA that they had, they were ready to kind of look for their man. Now, on top of that, I told y'all the son is going to play a significant role in this. His son went to prison on like an unrelated charge. He wasn't a murderer or anything like that, but he went to prison on an unrelated charge, and they had to take his DNA sample. Now, when they ran the DNA of the victims through the database, they got a partial hit on his son, Christopher's sample. Now, it wasn't a full match, but because that's his parent, they're related, there is a partial DNA match. So they knew that it had to be somebody in his family. That is how they put that final piece together to say Lonnie Franklin was the Grim Sleeper. On January 7th, 2010, police straight up raided his house. They took everything. They arrested him. They found hundreds and thousands of photos, and there was 180 photos of women that were unidentified, possibly victims, missing women. And he also had hundreds of hours of videotape, and he had the IDs of women in his garage, little like keepsakes and things for the crimes that he committed, the murders that he committed. They found all of this. Now, of course, the community is stunned. The community is shocked. They are shooketh, y'all, because they feel like he's Lonnie. He's an upstanding guy. He helps everybody else when he can. And they just couldn't believe that he would do something like that. But at this point, there's no way to refute it. There's no way to deny it. They got the DNA. They got ballistics, which he had a .25 caliber gun. So they have everything. He has the pictures of these women. He has some of these dead women's IDs. There's nothing that says that he didn't do this crime. He's arrested, and it takes 6 years for his case to go to trial. 6 years, y'all. Imagine being a family member of one of these women, and you're waiting and just waiting and waiting for justice to be served. 6 years. So while he's waiting for trial though, y'all, he in 2011 gets linked to 6 more murders. And he's linked by his MO. He's linked by having their identification in his home as well. And 4 of those women were identified and bodies were found, and 2 of them were not. So those women were Sharon Dismuke, which was actually his first victim that we later find out. And she was killed in January of 1984. So this was his very first victim. The next woman was Inez Warren, who was murdered in 1988. Georgia Mae Thompson, who was murdered in December of 2000. And then the two women whose body was never found was Ayla Marshall, who was murdered in 2005, and Rolenia Morris, who was also murdered in 2005. And both of these women were assumed to be murdered by Lonnie because these were two of the IDs that he had as a keepsake in his garage. Now, it's also identified that he had a male victim, and this male victim, his name was Thomas Sylvester Steele, and he was murdered by Lonnie because he was a friend of one of the victims, and he had basically figured out that Lonnie was the person that was murdering all these women in their community. So in order to shut him up and keep him quiet, he murdered Thomas. While all of these murders came to light and the police were 100% confident that he committed all of these 7 additional murders on top of the 10 murders and 1 attempted murder that he was already going to trial for, they decided not to move forward with charges for these additional 7 murders that were found after he was arrested and the case was already kind of going, because they didn't want to slow down or hinder his trial any further. It took 6 years. So finally, in 2016, he went to trial for the 10 murders and then the 1 attempted murder of Anitria Washington, and he was convicted on all counts, and he was sentenced to death, which is what he deserved. I think I've said this before to you guys. I am not the biggest proponent of the death penalty unless it's necessary. In cases like this, it's absolutely necessary. When you think you're God and you think that your life is more important than the next person's life, the death penalty is appropriate. Absolutely appropriate. So he was sentenced to death, but unfortunately in March of 2020, and specifically it was March 28th, 2020, he was found dead in his prison cell. So he never met the fate that he was set to meet. They said that there was no evidence of trauma or he wasn't attacked or anything like that. I could never find the actual cause of death for Lonnie Franklin, but just know he's dead and gone. I hope that it was a slow and painful death, but that is the story of Lonnie Franklin. And it's just another example of a wolf in sheep's clothing. This man was so well respected. I just find it so crazy how these men can be so well respected and hide what they do and hide their crazy so well that nobody in the entire community expects that he would do such a thing. Yeah, maybe he's a little weird. Maybe he's a little, freaky, creepy, but they never thought he would be the person to murder, not be a serial killer. Not the person that helped you however he could. He was the hood helper. Like you have to be a special type of crazy to be able to hide your crazy that well. You know what I'm saying? But y'all, that is the story of Lonnie Franklin, aka the Grim Sleeper. Now, I really enjoyed this story. You don't hear a lot of African-American serial killers, so I always find it interesting when I look into these cases because there's usually a very specific reason why they're killing. In this case, it was because he thought he needed to clean up the streets, the scum, the drug addicts, the prostitutes, the ones that were not contributing to the community. Very rarely do you see African-American serial killers who are just killing just because. I really like this format. I like being able to just have a conversation with you guys and tell you guys the story without having to worry about, beating my face at the same time. I can enjoy a nice glass of wine at the same time. I hope that you guys will join me next time with a glass of wine, have a little conversation. So let me know what you thought of this new format. I felt like it was much easier to get the story out in a more comfortable conversational way, but let me know your thoughts on it. Let me know how you feel about this new format. Do you prefer me still trying to do a makeup look while I'm telling you a true crime story? Do you prefer kicking back, relaxing with me, and having a nice glass of wine while we talk about some true crime? Let me know in the comments down below, y'all. I want to know what you guys think. I love interacting with you guys, so make sure you comment. Make sure you like the video. Let me know if you've tried this wine before. I love a good occasional sweet wine. This is a delicious, delicious chocolate wine. It kind of almost tastes like a Tootsie Roll. I don't really like Tootsie Rolls, but this is a Tootsie Roll flavor in a good way, if that makes sense. Maybe one day I'll do it live so we can chat live in real life, y'all. I think that would be so fun. But until then, I want to keep this format up. Let me know if you think otherwise, but make sure you guys subscribe so that you can catch the next video of what is now being called Unwind with True Crime. And I also want you guys to catch all my other good videos that are coming out. I got some fashion hauls coming up. I got my huge BoxyCharm add-on haul coming up, along with some other goodies. So make sure you stay subscribed. Make sure you hit that notification bell so that you get notified when I post those videos. But yeah, other than that, I truly appreciate you guys watching. Let me know if there's any other cases you want me to cover in the meantime. I would love to add those to my list. And yeah, it's been real, y'all. It's been so fun. So until next time, love you guys. Bye.